Okay, good morning. Guten Morgen, alle miteinander. Hello, I am very glad that you're all here, and I am thrilled to bring Roger Grunwald to Northgate this morning to share his important Holocaust-themed presentation called the Mitzvah Project. Roger is the child of a Holocaust survivor and for 5 decades has been a professional performing artist. In 2013, he was honored with a grant from the New York Foundation for the Arts for the development of the Mitzvah, the play that he has co-created and that you are about to see. During his career, Mr. Grunwald has appeared in over 75 stage productions in the United States and Europe, and his voice and face have been heard on and seen in commercials, industrials, video games, feature films, primetime and daytime TV, as well as documentaries for HBO, Court Television Network, and the Discovery Channel. At the conclusion of the video, Mr. Grunwald will give a talk, which will be followed by a question and answer session. To achieve the full effect, I encourage you to use the full screen option on your computer. So, ladies and gentlemen, students of Northgate and elsewhere, please welcome Roger Grunwald.
Thank you, Nancy, for that kind introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here with all of you today. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Mitzvah.
Sie haben das für einen Spaß gehalten. Ja, Sie machen heute
steht eine Laterne und fliegt noch weg. Da wollen wir uns wiedersehen bei der Laterne.
Die Partei ist Hitler! Hitler aber ist Deutschland! Wie Deutschland Hitler ist!
I'm standing in the square in Berlin. I am one of several hundred soldiers. I am in the front line. We are standing at attention, eyes straight ahead, motionless. It is a very special day. Almost directly in front of me, standing in his car, the Führer Adolf Hitler. Today, April 20, 1939, it is the Führer's birthday. At one moment, he looks directly at me. His pale blue eyes seem to look right through me. The hair on the back of my neck is standing up. I'm sweating under my uniform. I feel the drops of sweat drip down my chest. My undershirt is becoming damp. My breathing is shallow and rapid. All at the same time, we soldiers begin to say our oath to Hitler. Slowly, imperceptibly, I move my right hand, which is down at my side, up to the holster that contains my standard issue Luger revolver. Very carefully and with movements that I have gone over in my head more times than I can count. I open the holster, slip my fingers around the handle of my revolver. And then, in one lightning quick motion, as the final words of the oath are being spoken, I yank the revolver from the holster, leap forward, and shoot 6 rounds at the stunned dictator, hitting him several times. Mortally wounded, Adolf Hitler, before he ever had the chance to unleash his nightmare on the world, slumps to the ground, dead. Stunned silence, transfixed. I can feel all eyes moving now from the lifeless body of the tyrant to me. I slowly lower the still smoking gun that is in my right hand, and am instantly mobbed by the soldiers, generals, and various dignitaries. Everyone is shouting hysterically. I am lifted up on the shoulders of my comrades. The war ended today before it even began. By my hand. By my hand.
That's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. Christoph Rosenberg, wake up, you're dreaming again. You see, if you're a German half-Jew and you're serving in Hitler's army, things can get a little confusing. Christoph, Hitler died by his own hand in Berlin in 1945, in the Führerbunker. When Hitler reviewed the troops in the square on his birthday, the soldiers didn't even have ammunition in their guns. Hitler wasn't stupid. By his hand, you see this hand? Fingers, palm, knuckles, nails. What is a hand good for? Well, I can think of a few things. You can kiss the hand, you can wave the hand, you can shake the hand. It's good for planting, harvesting, tasting, touching. Okay, what else is it good for? Well, between 1936 and 1945 in Europe, one thing that stands out that the hand is exceptionally good at is killing. Shooting, for example. Let me tell you, all kinds of shooting. Yes, a hand just like this one pulled the trigger of the German machine guns in Seville. The phalangists. Riga, Vilna, Minsk, Warsaw, Lvov, Krakow, Kovno, Stalingrad. And many, many more cities, towns, villages, open fields, wooded areas, attics, basements, school playgrounds, and courtyards. Hands are very useful, versatile, and necessary, but not only for shooting. They work well with knives, bayonets, hand grenades, flamethrowers, gas chambers, and ovens. I mean, how do you open a canister of Zyklon B, the contents of which you then pour, using your hands, I might add, through the specially built air vents at the top of the gas chambers at Auschwitz, bringing about the death of millions of innocent people, mostly Jews. How? You guessed it. How do you pull a pin from a grenade and throw it into a group of unarmed civilians? How do you open bomb bay doors and release tons of incendiary bombs over the civilian population of a city? How does a German doctor inject blue dye into the brown eyes of a Jewish girl from Budapest? How? Correct! Yes, I know. There's this small matter of the brain sending a signal and all that biochemical crap, but that's minor. Without the hand, nothing. Using this hand, a man signed his name on a piece of paper. Often. Orders, treaties, judgments, plans, sentences, convictions, edicts, decrees. In the 1930s and 40s, tens of millions of lives of human beings were destroyed as a result of the papers that were signed by this hand. Yes, this hand did not always kill. Yes, that is true. Yes, this hand was acts of futility. July 1943, Bialystok, Poland. This was the hand of a Jewish mother. She instinctively moved her hand to shield the head of her infant son, whom she was cradling in her arms in a futile attempt to stop the bullet fired by the revolver in the hand of a 22-year-old SS whom she'd never met, never exchanged 2 words with, who himself was the son of a mother who raised him, cradled him as an infant, stroked his head lovingly with her hand in her home, in her village, somewhere on the outskirts of Dresden.
Everybody knows. Shmuel Berkowitz, everything I fix. The tall German, he walks up to me, his face close to my face, a crooked smile. I smell his breath, alcohol. Maybe he needs it to be himself. Then the German laughs. He looks at me and laughs. The other Germans laugh too. Skill with a saw is a very useful thing. In Auschwitz, you will be a surgeon. A surgeon for the Jews. Was sagst du, Jude? Dankeschön, Dankeschön. What should I say? So I work in the infirmary, the Krankenbau. It's more like a mortuary. 4 months since the train platform. I'm not yet a Muslim. I'm not yet a walking dead. A man is brought in a wheelbarrow. They tell me to lift him. He's a big man. It takes all of my strength. His head is wrapped in a tidy bandage. Blonde hair. I look at his face. I've seen him before. Those eyes, a scar on his left cheek. The rest of him is a mess. Blood on his shirt, pants, spittle on his face. Oy, in his pants, he has made on himself what they have done. They tell me this is a special one, that I better take care of him. Everyone they want dead except this. This man, he even gives me medicine for him, only for him. The man, he tries to speak German. I speak a little. Okay, listen, I fix you. Ausruhen, calm down. He doesn't want me to touch him. To him, I'm a dirty Jew. Sei gesund. The Germans let him sleep for a few days. They even give him special food rations. Why is he here? Who is this man? Then they take him to the Appellplatz for roll call. When he comes back broken, his right eye bloody, he smells of urine. I hear from another prisoner, the Germans singled him out during the roll call for special mistreatment. What they call Sport. Several days pass. The man is in bad shape. An SS doctor comes, examines him, cleans him, gives him an injection. Then once again to the Appellplatz for roll call and more. Sport. This time is the worst. What they did to him. His left arm is broken at the elbow. It bends the wrong way, hanging. I see the bone. It comes through the skin. I try to clean him with a damp rag. He screams with pain. Then he throws himself on the ground. He's shouting something about his father. Wait, don't hit me again, Papa, please. Es tut mir leid. Mama and I wanted to surprise you, Papa. I worked so hard to learn the Baruchas and the Torah portion. For my bar mitzvah, Mama thought you'd be pleased. No, I won't, never again, I promise. Only German. Look, Papa. Ich bin Oberleutnant. I'm a first lieutenant. Mein Eisernes Kreuz, erste Klasse. My Iron Cross, first class. And look, Papa, bei der Führers own hand. Eine Deutsch-Blutigkeitserklärung. A declaration of German blood. With my name, Christoph Rosenberg.
Now that's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. Eine Deutsch-Blutigkeitserklärung? Christoph Rosenberg, the half-Jew, is miraculously transformed into an Aryan with one stroke of the pen. A pen in the hand of the Fuhrer. Shmuel Berkowitz of Bialystok, on the other hand, is a 100% pure, glatt kosher Polish Jew.
I was there, me, Shmuel Berkowitz, hidden in the tree, holding on, the bark under my fingernails. Wait. That voice. Esther! The SS doesn't wait. The bullet slices through her hand and shatters the head of her infant son. The back of her hand turns red, like the puppies in the field that surround us. And now here I am in the tree, helplessly watching. Mother and baby tumble to the ground. The SS men are howling with laughter. They pass a battle, one to the other. At the edge of the pit, one of them lists to the side. They are quite drunk. The SS officer steps forward. He draws his foot back like in a children's game. The foot kicks. The little body of Esther's baby flies into the air. Esther picks herself up and throws herself after her baby into the pit. I bite my hand to stop the scream rising in my throat. Someone is shouting, "Show me your orders." Everyone freezes. Another officer is walking toward them. From the way they react, he must be of a higher rank. I see his eyes, a scar on his left cheek. They salute him, words are spoken. Then they each take turns shooting into the pit. I can't watch anymore.
I am watching an action taking place in a magnificent field of poppies. I tell my driver to turn into the field and bring me closer. SS auxiliaries, Ukrainians or Lithuanians, and the German SS detachment. In front of them, maybe 200 Jews, women and children mostly. They stand in front of a deep trench. Many of them are naked, their clothes heaped in piles. In front of me, a young SS officer. He appears drunk. He draws back his leg and kicks an object into the air. I see now. It is the body of a baby. The young mother then hurls her naked body into the pit after her dead infant. Was zum Teufel ist hier denn los? Show me your orders. The empty-headed SS buffoon makes a big show of saluting me. He says his orders come directly from the Führer. And what are the Jews good for anyway but target practice? They all laugh. The officer turns and aims his revolver into the pit. The bullet shatters the young woman's ankle. But she continues to crawl over the pile of bloody corpses towards the body of her infant. My blood runs cold. My blood. One of his comrades aims and shoots, grazing the young woman's right ear. More drunken laughter. I slip my fingers around the handle of my revolver, move to the edge, take aim, and shoot into the trench. Once in the back of the head, she goes limp. The laughter stops. Game over. I turn to the young officer. His mouth is wide open in surprise. The second bullet from my revolver finds its mark and explodes through the back of his head. By my hand. By my hand. By his hand? By his hand. The hand of First Lieutenant Christoph Rosenberg, the expert marksman, the Mischling, the good son who studied Torah at the behest of his Christian mother, but would become a good German at the insistence of his Jewish father. Go figure. So, what is the hand of a good German good for? Say the secret word and win $100. No? Well, in the 1930s and 40s, good Germans were very good at raising their hands in the Nazi salute. Good Germans used their hands to usher the Mischlings, the partial Jews, to their good new homes in places like Sachsenhausen, Auschwitz, Sobibor, Belsen. But this Mischling, this good German, found his home in the Third Reich because the German war machine found the hand of First Lieutenant Christoph Rosenberg to be valuable. It was the hand of a leader, a marksman, a killer. So valuable was this hand that the hand of Hitler himself declared this son of a Jewish father an Aryan. But now, the hand that was raised hundreds of times in a Nazi salute was for the first time raised to stop an action at a trench, in a field, in Bialystok, Poland. This was the hand that with one clean shot to the back of the head put an end to the suffering of a pitiable naked soul, and then turned the gun on her SS tormentor. Now this hand became the hand of a betrayer, and the hand of the brutal master would exact revenge for that betrayal. And not even Christoph's dream of ending the war before it began could end the nightmare. But the hand of the Jew from Bialystok, the one who could fix anything with his hands, had a special instrument at his disposal, a damp rag. It was the rag he used to cleanse. In the infirmary, there was more like a mortuary. It was the cleansing rag that he gently placed over the nose and mouth of the fallen marksman. The half-Jew, a dying man's eyes open, a brief struggle for breath, a hand reaches up, a look, a final release, then silence, no more pain. The hand finally at rest. Yishkedal v'yishkedal shemei rabo, ba'ol modivaro herusei, v'yamlich malchusei b'chayachon v'yomachon v'chayedachon beis Yisrael. Pagalo uvizman koriv v'imru amen, yehi shmei rabo v'orach b'olam, ulolmei, olmei. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was the mitzvah. Now we're going to move on to my talk. So, anyways, I was saying before, I'm thrilled to be here with you, all of you today. I hope everyone is okay in these very challenging times that we're in. Now, again, just to make sure everyone's clear, I'm Roger Grunwald, the fellow who's in the video you just saw. If over the course of my talk you have any questions about the play, like, well, things you didn't understand, or if anything comes up during my talk that you have questions about, just click on the chat stream button, which I think is on the bottom of your screen, and ask whatever question you might have as succinctly as you can in a sentence or two if possible. And I'll get to as many of your questions as I can over the course of the question and answer portion of my presentation, which will come right after my talk. Anyway, so let me start by telling you a little bit about myself, my family background, and how it is I'm here with you today. Well, I was born and raised in San Francisco, went to college at UC Berkeley, and for close to 5 decades, I've been a performing artist. Now, in addition to the characters I played in the video you just saw, these are a couple other characters I played over the years. But for 3 of those decades, when I was acting, I was also a community organizer. During my community organizing years, I helped to build a number of organizations in New York City that focused on empowering young people in underserved communities. I'm also a co-founder of an experimental theater in New York. And I've spent the better part of the last 12 years creating and performing in Holocaust-themed dramatic works like the Mitzvah Project. And my mom and dad were both German Jews and came to America after the war. In the 1930s, my dad fled from Germany to the Philippines, which before the war, the Philippines was one of a handful of countries in the world that admitted Jewish refugees. Well, once my dad was settled there, he sent for his mom, who joined him in December of 1938. She was lucky she got out when she did. It was 1 month after Kristallnacht, a Nazi anti-Jewish rampage throughout Germany. In English, Kristallnacht is known as the Night of Broken Glass. because of the thousands of Jewish businesses, synagogues, and homes that were destroyed and burned over 2 days in late 1938. This was my grandmother's passport. You'll notice the large red J for Jude, Jew, at the top. Although my father and his mother were able to find a safe haven in the Philippines, at least until the Japanese invasion, which forced them into hiding, my mother and her family weren't so lucky. They first tried to secure visas to the United States, but were unsuccessful. Both before and during the war, the United States closed its doors to Jews fleeing the Nazis. Holland was my mother's family's second choice. They fled to Amsterdam from their home in Frankfurt, thinking that would be safe, as did many German Jews. After all, Holland was neutral in World War I. But in May of 1940, after Holland capitulated to the Germans, it was just a matter of time before my mother's family, as well as most every other Jew in Amsterdam, not to mention the rest of Holland, was rounded up and deported. This photo is of my mother in the center, flanked by her two sisters. It was taken a few years before they were rounded up. On the left is my Aunt Ilse, who I never knew. She was the youngest of the three. In 1943, at the age of 23, Ilse was murdered in Sobibor, a Nazi death camp in Poland, along with her father, Hugo. On the right is my Aunt Annie, who survived the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. Well, I was fairly young when I first learned of my mother's internment at Auschwitz and what happened to her after she was deported. This photo is of my mother's forearm. It was taken by my sister toward the end of my mom's life. What you're seeing is the now faded number that was branded onto my mom's arm at Auschwitz, 78465. These crude tattoos were branded onto the arms of all the slave laborers at the camp. You see, slave laborers at Auschwitz no longer had names, only numbers. But I never really knew the details of my mother's camp experience growing up, not until I was in my late teens. I was 18 or 19 when I read her oral history for the very first time. It was only then that I was finally able to process and understand something. You see, no matter how many times I read her story, I don't think I'll ever really be able to imagine, to comprehend what she went through. This photo of my mother was taken a few short weeks after her liberation. It's hard to tell, but she had already been gaining back weight. At the time, she was recovering in a Red Cross camp in the south of Sweden. When this photo was taken, it was already several weeks later. She had started to look much healthier. When my sister and I were growing up, my mom used to speak at high schools, community organizations, colleges, churches, and synagogues. As with other survivors, she felt an obligation as one of those who lived to make sure that what happened won't be forgotten. In retrospect, it's clear that my mom's history and life experience had a profound influence on the direction of my life and the choices I made. On some level, I understood that I too had an obligation, as my mother's son, to participate in a fight for justice and against prejudice wherever it is and whoever is victimized by it. My mom's my inspiration. She's literally why I'm here today. The following three photos were taken last year on the occasion of the 75th anniversary of Auschwitz's liberation by the Soviet Army. You know, I was thinking the other day about faces. There are certain faces that people the world over recognize right off the bat. For example, the faces of certain celebrities like Beyonce, Michael Jackson, or the Beatles, or historical figures like Martin Luther King or Einstein. Well, one of the faces I'm thinking of is that of a teenager. It's a face many of you might recognize. This is the person I'm thinking of, Anne Frank. As many of you know, Anne Frank died at the hands of the Nazis when she was 15 years old. As a 13 and 14-year-old, when she and her family were in hiding, Anne began to write a diary, which you may have read. But after hiding for 761 days, their secret annex was discovered by the Nazis, and the family was captured. With the exception of Anne's father, Otto, Anne and the rest of her family perished in Nazi concentration camps for no other reason than they were Jews. It was after the war that Otto found and then had Anne's diary published. Exactly 75 years later, the face of a middle-aged Black man by the name of George Floyd, who was murdered by police in Minneapolis, became a face that people around the world have also come to know. Massive protests have taken place in cities across the US, as well as in cities around the world. These are some of them. Tragically, we have come to know about both Anne Frank and George Floyd and recognize their faces because of the horrific things that happened to them. But they are just two of tens of millions of people, young and old, people of color, Jews, Muslims, poor people, LGBTQ people, who over the years have had their lives snuffed out, often in the worst ways imaginable, and for no other reason than the color of their skin, their ethnicity, their beliefs, who they choose to love, or how they identify. So you just saw The Mitzvah, my short play that tells a story about both Christoph Rosenberg, the half-Jewish officer in the German army, and Shmuel Berkowitz, the Polish Jew from the town of Bialystok. These two characters are composites. They're based on, but were not themselves, real people. In the play, Shmuel and Christoph cross paths during the darkest days of the Holocaust. But the play is more than just these two stories. It's also a story about the impact, the devastating impact of prejudice. Let me tell you what I mean. So Christoph's father was Jewish, but his mother was Christian. That's why the Nazis called Christoph a Mischling, which was the Nazis' derogatory term meaning half-breed or mongrel. Although Jews have lived there for centuries, Germany has been and still is today a majority Christian country. And as you may recall from the study guide, the Catholic Church, both in Germany and throughout most of Europe, as well as many Protestant denominations, have for centuries perpetuated hateful myths about Jews and Judaism that can be traced all the way back to the beginnings of Christianity itself. The irony is that virtually all of the earliest Christians, including Jesus and his apostles, were themselves Jews. Anyway, back to Germany. Up until the late 1700s, most German Jews lived in ghettos and couldn't read, write, or speak German. But over time, that began to change, and slowly Jews began to assimilate, hoping to find a place for themselves in German society. But in the process, they encountered all kinds of barriers. Jews were barred from many professions and weren't allowed to vote or become citizens. And periodically, Christian Germans went on murderous rampages, targeting and killing Jewish men, women, and children just because they were Jews. Given the ways they were being discriminated against and persecuted, many German Jews whose families had lived in Germany for generations emigrated to other parts of Europe and to North America, seeking a better life. But many other German Jews didn't want to leave because Germany had been their homeland for generations. But of those who stayed, many felt that the only option open to them was to stop being Jewish. Let me tell you what I mean. Between the years 1800 and 1900, more than 70,000 Jews converted to Christianity in both Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and many more abandoned Judaism altogether, not even bothering to convert. Between the years 1870 and 1929, intermarriage was off the charts. During that time, it is estimated that in both Germany and Austro-Hungary, some 84,000 mixed marriages took place. But by 1933, the year Hitler became chancellor, everything changed, even for the descendants of Jews who had intermarried, converted, or became secular. Not to mention those who had maintained their Jewish traditions and identity, like my mom's family, who were very religious. To the Nazis, it didn't matter if you were a believer or an atheist. If you had Jewish blood somewhere in your family line, you were now in the crosshairs of the Nazi regime. In 1935, Nazi Germany passed two radically discriminatory pieces of legislation known as the Nuremberg Laws. These laws laid the legal groundwork for the persecution of Jews and eventually the Holocaust. But the Nuremberg Laws didn't materialize out of thin air. The Nazi lawyers who drafted the Nuremberg Laws closely studied the laws of another country. That country was the United States. America in the early 20th century was the leading racist jurisdiction in the world. Those are the words, as you can see on this slide, of Yale law professor James Whitman. He goes on to say, Nazi lawyers were interested in, looked very closely at, and were ultimately influenced by American race law. Well, one of the statutes that became a central part of the Nuremberg laws was a law prohibiting what the Nazis called Rassenschande, which roughly translates to racial defilement. Rassenschande was almost directly copied from a Jim Crow law in the United States. In America, these were called anti-miscegenation laws, which were primarily designed to prevent intimate relations between whites and blacks. Anti-miscegenation laws were enforced from the late 1600s until 1967 here in the US, close to 300 years. Although anti-miscegenation laws, despite the fact that they were ruled unconstitutional in 1967, were still on the books in several states in the US as late as the year 2000. Not that long ago. From 1913 until 1948, 30 out of the then 48 states prohibited relations between people of different races. California repealed its anti-miscegenation statute in 1948. Then there was America's eugenics movement, which promoted the superiority of the so-called white Nordic race and heavily influenced Congress. In the 1920s, as a direct result of the lobbying efforts of the eugenics movement, the US Congress passed legislation severely limiting the immigration of certain so-called undesirable populations, such as Jews, people from Eastern Europe, and Italians. The political power of and big money behind the eugenics movement, starting in the late 19th century, right up through the Second World War, gave it enormous political clout. The laws enacted from the influence of America's eugenics movement also served as source material for the Nazis' Nuremberg race laws. Let me explain. 33 states in the US legalized the practice of forced sterilization, led by California, which sterilized more so-called undesirables than all the other states combined. Again, it was America's eugenics movement, which was the political driver behind these laws. It was the eugenics-inspired sterilization statute on the books in California, which served as the model for the Nazis' own program of forced sterilization. Over 400,000 so-called defectives were sterilized in Germany during the life of that program. By comparison, a mere 60,000 were forcibly sterilized in the United States. Okay, I'd like to go back to the character of Christoph Rosenberg, the half-Jewish first lieutenant. Well, beginning in April 1940, most partial Jews who had been serving in the Wehrmacht were discharged. Many were sent to forced labor camps or worse. However, several thousand male Mishlings, mostly junior and senior officers, who were considered to be valuable to the war effort and who had an Aryan appearance, were declared Deutschblutig, to have German blood, and were allowed to remain active members of the German armed forces. These approved Mishlings received an exemption, the highest form of which was the Deutschblutigkeitserklärung, the declaration of German blood mentioned in the play. Well, the Nazis created their pseudo-scientific racialist mythology to justify and carry out their murderous state-sponsored anti-Semitism. But the demonization of Jews was only half of their grotesque mythos. The other half involved the elevation of the so-called Aryan to the status of an ideal. But try as they might, they never did get that Aryan thing right. And it's not just because the master race concept is a total crock, which it is. Let me give you an example. In 1939, this photo of a young soldier appeared in a recruitment poster for the German army with the caption, "The ideal German soldier. Here standing before us, ladies and gentlemen, is a perfect example of a true Aryan ready to lead the German people to the promised land of our 1,000-year Reich." Oops. As it turned out, the soldier in the photo and the recruitment poster was Private First Class Werner Goldberg, a 100% pure half Jew, but he sure looked the part. He looked the part. Well, what does that really mean? The madness of judging someone's worth as a human being simply by how they look or sound or speak or where they come from is beyond absurd, but it doesn't stop it from happening again and again. And that's at the root of white supremacy, no matter where you live or what language you speak. That's what we all have to grapple with in America today, now, all of us. Ironically, there were several cases in Nazi Germany where members of the Gestapo and SS, when they were out of uniform, were set upon by other Nazis simply because of how they looked. The thugs thought that their fellow Nazis looked Jewish, and for that reason, they couldn't be real Germans. Before I wrap up, I'd like to leave you with the following thought. It was a mere handful of years ago that human beings for the very first time successfully mapped the human genome. Well, one of the things we've learned during this period of incredible scientific advancement in the field of genetics is that over the millennia, the DNA of every human being has become so intermixed with every other human being that there is no longer, frankly, because there never was any pure anyone. No pure Nordic people, African people, Middle Eastern people, Caucasian people, Asian people. On the most fundamental level, race and ethnicity are meaningless and wholly unscientific constructs. We're all an amalgam. We're all Mishlings. There is no other. The other is us. A final word. I know you don't believe that what I've been talking about today is simply in the past. Unfortunately, stigmatizing the other still goes on. Well, one of the most shocking photos to come out of the failed insurrection of January 6th at our nation's capital was this one. The name on this man's sweatshirt is the name of the concentration camp where my mother was nearly killed. 1,300,000 human beings were deported to Auschwitz. 1,100,000 men, women, and children were killed there. To think that somebody was wearing a hoodie with those words while defiling the nation's capital is more than deeply upsetting. Thank you. Okay. we're going to go. Hello, Nancy. You're muted. I can't hear you.
No, I'm not.
There you go. Anyway, I'm thrilled that I was able to share this with all of you, and I'm eager to hear from you if you have any comments, thoughts, questions about anything I said, or something from the play that you didn't understand or you wanted to know more about. I'm eager to hear from you and learn what you have to say and what questions you have. So fire away. Nancy, if you have any questions, send them my way.
First of all,
That is-
Roger, we want to thank you very much for coming and for bringing your presentation and your talk. I do have a comment from one of the students who wants to thank you for bringing your presentation to us this morning. I think it's very important that youth and young people today not forget history. They're living it right now in the pandemic and in the Black Lives Matter movement that has started with George Floyd, as you mentioned. So I think this is extraordinarily important, and I really do appreciate your time. So there's a lot of people who are thanking you in the chat. So I want to be sure that you realize that this community is very open and grateful for your time. Someone has said that it was an incredible presentation, and thank you. I appreciate how Mr. Grunwald's words relate to so many subjects, not just German, but science, psychology, English, German, sociology, and history. So many things.
Oh, nice.
As of now, there are no questions. So I have a question, however, that I'm interested in. And I am not Jewish, and I've heard of a bar mitzvah as being a celebration. But why is it that you named your presentation the mitzvah? What does that word mean? Can you go into a little bit of information about that, please?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, the word mitzvah in Hebrew has many meanings: commandment, obligation. And in common usage these days, one of the ways in common kind of vernacular in the Jewish world, it's also come to mean a good deed. A mitzvah is a good deed. Well, that's what my director and I had in mind when we started creating this piece a number of years ago. There are two incidents that occur in the course of the play that under normal circumstances, normal times would be considered sins. But in the time of the Holocaust, these two incidents could be considered mitzvot, which is the plural for mitzvah. So I'm going to throw the question back at the audience, given that clue. What incidents might we be referring to that could be considered good deeds, again, in a non-traditional sense, appropriate to the Holocaust? So that's my question back to the audience about why we chose the word mitzvah to refer to, well, the whole play, but particularly regarding two incidents in the play.
Okay. Let's see if the chat blows up.
Yeah. In the meantime, you could send more questions my way. We can always come back to that.
So there are a couple here. As an actor and as someone with ties to the Holocaust, how did the immersion in this play affect you? And how did you deal with it?
That's a good question. Well, this play, I've done this about 90 times around the world in person. I mean, in like 26 states in the US and some in Canada, the UK and Israel as well. It's been a labor of love for me on the one hand, but it's also demanding, both physically and emotionally, because of some of the content. So, my training as a performer has been helping because it enables me to tap into emotionality that is already there. I mean, this, when I think about what happened to my mom, when I think about what happened to her sister, my aunt, when I think about what happened to the millions of others, it's very emotional. and I've learned how to be able to tap into it and still be disciplined enough to not be overcome. It's a challenge, but it's I guess you could say it has a therapeutic component to it, because it enables me to give expression to something that you can't just go walking down the street talking to somebody, tell them, what you're thinking about or feeling about relative to the Holocaust. The one thing I want to mention too, this play, The Mitzvah, was developed just before 2014. In 2017, I expanded and deepened it into a full-length one-person play, which is currently called I Died in Auschwitz, a remarkable story of survival, which takes the characters of Christoph and Shmuel and expands their lives, so you get to know more about them, and it has other characters as well. That was a very emotional experience for me. I premiered that in San Francisco in 2017, and then had a return engagement in 2018. That was even more demanding emotionally and physically than The Mitzvah, but it's on the one, it's a conflicting experience. It's both demanding emotionally, and it's very kind of life affirming, because I can touch people with it, and that's what makes it worthwhile. So it has both sides to it. I hope I'm answering your question.
That's great. So a student asked, what was the creative process like for The Mitzvah? Well, there's a lot of questions here, so.
Okay, I'll try to shorten my answers. The creative process. Well, when I was in New York, I started studying with this great theater teacher who is a great man of the theater. His name is Win Handman. For those of you who are in theater, you might have heard of him. He was active until last year, when he died of COVID-19 at the age of 97. But he was not only a great teacher, but he also was a great developer of solo artists. For those of you who know some of these solo, like John Leguizamo, Eric Bogosian, and others. And when I was in class, there was an actress who was working on a solo show, and a light bulb went off in my head that's something I wanted to do. I've been wanting to do something to draw on my history, my family history, and I didn't know how. And then it just dawned on me that maybe I can create a one-person show. So I started writing some stuff, and then I went to visit my aunt. My mom had already been deceased by then. This was in 2011. And I met with her to develop material to interview her. And while I was there, she gave me a book called Hitler's Jewish Soldiers. The author is Brian Mark Rigg. It's kind of the seminal work in the field, which revealed this heretofore hidden history of Germans of Jewish descent, half and quarter Jews who served in the Wehrmacht, some full Jews. And I realized it was a story that needed to be told. And also it had great theatrical, from my perspective, great theatrical promise. So I started to create this character. And the first character that I created was Christoph. And then I worked with my director, Annie McGreevy, who also a very talented actor and director, solo artist. And we started to develop collectively the rest of the play. I did most of the writing. And she helped to shape it, and we put it in a festival, and and then the New York Times did a story on it, and that kind of catapulted this forward.
Okay, thank you. So from you kind of answered this somewhat a little bit. John Litton is our drama teacher, and he says, Roger, great performance and talk. Could you talk on your process as an actor and what it took to portray the characters? I think you've touched on some.
Well, the process was, in rehearsal, it's a time of discovery and time of making choices and trying things and taking risks. Fortunately, Annie, my director, was very good at pushing me to go places perhaps that I didn't feel comfortable going, because they were emotionally challenging. That's one of the things, after you start to develop a character and you become comfortable with the character on its emotional arc, it becomes not easier, but you feel more comfortable with what you're doing. So I tested out different monologues. Actually, Annie and I went to a performance, a solo artist in New York, when it was in development, and the actor who was on stage, it wasn't a play that anything close to what we're talking about, but he had wonderful dexterity in his hands. He was doing things with his hands that we were both remarking on it at intermission, and it inspired me to go home and start writing the monologue from the opening by the chorus character, the one with a cigar, about the hand. When it's a riff, it's an extended riff about the hand and how the hand is, being used in the war and other things. Anyway, so that was part of the process. It was kind of an amalgamation of things, that being one example. And I'd done a lot of reading, and the Shmuel character, both Annie and I were pretty much, we felt very strongly that we needed to have someone in the play, a character that was an example of someone from the dust of history. The vast majority of Jews who lost their lives were poorer Jews from Eastern Europe, not so much from Germany and the Western part of Europe. Not to say that they weren't murdered, also the Western Jews, but by far in Poland, for example, where the Shmuel character is from, the vast majority of Jews murdered in the war were from Poland. Anyway, that hopefully answers your question.
So here's another student question. How did your mother even begin to describe the atrocities she had to go through to you and your sister?
It was very hard. For many years, my mom, as most survivors, didn't talk about it. It's like they couldn't bring themselves to relive it. And they were also, I think there's a certain level that a lot of survivors were concerned that people wouldn't believe them, that it was so extreme. It was so so unimaginable that I think many survivors just held on to, and it hurt them. It actually damaged them by holding on to it. There was a turning point for many survivors in 1961, I believe, the trial of Adolf Eichmann, who was one of the architects of the final solution, the mass murder of Jews. That he was captured by an Israeli force, kind of a secretive force. They kidnapped him, and I think it was in Argentina, and they brought him to Israel to stand trial. And that trial was televised. And I think for many survivors, that became a moment when they felt that they had to come out and to share their stories. Now, not to say that others didn't, but my mom, I think it was after that, it was later in the 60s that she started to speak at high schools and colleges. It was very difficult. She also, in the late 60s, gave an oral history at a Holocaust center in San Francisco. And that it helped to normalize. I mean, it's kind of, again, how you talk about therapy, talk therapy. Just by giving expression to stuff that's going on for you, it can be really helpful to individuals to do that if they have someone empathic who is listening, or sympathetic who is listening. And I think she understood that she had a role to play. As time went on, she realized that she, as a survivor, had a responsibility to those who didn't survive to tell the story of what happened so that people would never forget. So I think there were a number of things that motivated her, but it was hard, and it always has been. I'm sorry.
And you kind of inherited that responsibility by bringing high school students.
Yeah, I look at it as, well, again, my mother's generation, the survivor generation, is dying out. There's a void now, because a lot of survivors did speak in front of students and community and members of the community, but we don't have those eyewitness testimonies to be given live anymore. So yes, and I said, I thought to myself, I have the opportunity to leverage the power of the theater to put people there as best as I can in the ways as similar to what a survivor was able to do. So I kind of look at it as an obligation, a commandment, a mitzvah of my own in the more traditional sense, to get to do this, to be able to get this out in front of people. Yeah.
Well, we're really glad that you have done that. I think you've kind of answered this. How was the writing process like? I recall that you said you did most of the writing, but was there some collaboration with Annie?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, Annie tweaked and made some adjustments, made some suggestions on some of the things that I wrote. I did vice versa with her. It was a collaborative process for sure. So, and I think we kind of learned it as we were doing it. We were building the boat as we were sailing. I mean, we pretty much finished it by the time we were in the first. There was a festival, looking for the word, a theater festival that I performed this in first, and it was from there. Someone was in the audience and said, "Oh, you have to come to my synagogue and perform it there," and I did. And then I called I followed some community colleges in the New York area and another synagogue, and I actually pitched the New York Times on the story, and lo and behold, this never happened. You call, so I'm told, you call like the theater editor of the New York Times, and they never answer their phone, and if you leave a message, it will disappear into a black hole. Well, he answered the phone, and I told him about what I'm doing. He said, "Well, it's not a story for us because you're not doing a run of the play, but I'm going to pass it along to the bureau chief in New Jersey because my first performances were there, and they assigned a writer and wrote the story." And needless to say, the New York Times can confer instant credibility.
Yes, indeed. Wow. Okay. So here a student says, "Thank you so much for your time. Could you talk a little bit how you came up with the pacing and the structure of your piece?"
Rehearsal. I mean, again, the structure. Yeah, you try things and you say, well, should this monologue go in this spot, and then we tried different things, and we kind of felt like, for example, the opening. Well, I created, that was one of the first pieces I created. When Christoph is talking about imagining murdering Hitler and ending the war before it began, and then the chorus comes on, that's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. Christoph, Hitler didn't kill it, he died by his own hand in Berlin in 1945 in the Führer bunker. So that first piece, actually, it's interesting. In the theater that I'd been involved in, this experimental theater, we'd done a lot of work. I don't know if people, especially those who study the theater, know about the East German playwright Heiner Muller. Well, my theater, the Castillo Theater, was the leading American theater that was producing his work. And he has a particular style, very postmodern, and the structure is very unusual. And the opening monologue was a bit of an homage to Heiner Muller. It's this, it's hard to describe, but it's kind of it's a bit of a surreal moment. And what it is actually, that opening monologue is an imagining that Christoph has as he's dying at the end of the play. It may not be obvious, but it's a fever dream he's having, imagining that he's doing a replay of when he took his oath in front of Hitler in a square in Berlin in 1939 on Hitler's birthday. He's reimagining what he went through in Berlin, this time that he pulls a gun from his holster and kills Hitler and puts an end to the war before it began. Anyway, so that actually was one of the very first things I wrote, and then we started to assemble things. But it was trial and error. What works here? What doesn't work here? There's only one way to find out. You got to try it and see. And then we look at each other, Annie and I, and say, "Well, what do you think?" Or yes. That's kind of the process.
This is similar. How did you build the characters for the performance? And then was it difficult to delve into characters that contributed to the Holocaust?
You know how we did it, how we created the characters structurally for the performance. There was no better way to deepen and establish your characters than doing it over and over again. And it's not just in rehearsal, but doing it for a live audience, you know, and getting a sense of how they're responding. And it affects you. You can't let how the audience is responding change your performance, but you have to let it in. I mean, that's one of the challenges for actors, not to, like, if an audience is silent, some actors, this is a problem, actors are too concerned about what the audience is thinking or feeling. It throws you out of your performance. You can't do that. This is to my actor colleague students. You have to really be focused on either the person you're performing with and be listening and connecting with them, or if you're doing a solo piece, locked into not only what you're saying, but what you're seeing in front of you, because you have to be able to see it, feel it, and react to it in a way as if it's there. So you got to create the reality, and that's a challenge. That's only half of the question. What was the other half of the question?
Was it difficult to delve into characters that contributed?
Oh yeah, some of the characters, like, you know, the SS man on the platform when Shmuel is there begging for his life. He says, you know, skill with the saw. It's a very useful thing. In Auschwitz, you would be a surgeon for the Jews. Yeah, and actually in the extended play that I do, I have an 18-minute monologue by the man who was in charge of the liquidation of the Warsaw and Bialystok ghetto, Odilo Globochnik. And he goes on an extended rep. You know, you have to tap into the feelings, the emotionality that you're feeling, not so much about these perpetrators, but you have to find in you the dark side. Everybody's got it. You just got to find out how to tap into it. And it's, again, there's no alternative to working it and rehearsing it and and breaking down your monologues and know where your peaks and valleys are, where you're going to be emphasizing it, where you're going to let a moment overcome you. But again, there's no alternative to doing it over and over and over again in rehearsal and in performance. That helps to solidify it. So yeah, performing perpetrators was challenging, but frankly, there's enough anger in me, given all those things that happened to my mom and so many others, that I can use that anger and darkness, hatred, when I'm creating those perpetrator characters.
Mr. Litton has a response to that too. He says, I feel you here, Roger. Actors, if you believe and you feel it, the audience will believe and feel it.
Absolutely, John, you're absolutely right. You have to, the only way for the audience to feel something or to believe something is if you do yourself. Absolutely.
And this is a good follow-up here. Have your feelings about the project ever messed you up when performing?
Oh, you mean in performance? I'm assuming that's what that question is. Well, almost. I mean, I think I'm disciplined enough as a performer so it doesn't, but sometimes I start crying on stage, and you have to be careful. You can't indulge emotionality when you're doing a performance, because you have a job to do on stage. It's making me emotional. Think about it. The job is to tell the story and to touch the people in the audience. And if you get self-indulgent with your emotionality, it's going to take everybody out of it. They're going to be thinking about, oh, that poor actor. And you don't want that. You have to, the emotionality has to be in service of the play and the story and the character.
Mhm.
But it's challenging. Yeah, there are moments, when, all of a sudden the stuff wells up in you, and I have to say, all right, that's happening, but I have to continue telling the story.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so here's an interesting one. At what point in your life did you decide you wanted to become a performer?
Interesting question. Well, fortunately for me, when I was in grammar school, I loved to sing, and our music teacher in this grammar school encouraged me to do more. She said I should audition for the San Francisco Opera Boys Chorus when I was like 10, which I did. And I was accepted. I first went into the training group, and then I went into the concert group, and I performed in a number of operas with the San Francisco Opera Company at the War Memorial Opera House, in the city center, civic center area. We went on tour, and it gave me the first taste of the stage. And frankly, it was great. It was exciting, and I could, and I learned how to, I learned some things but I didn't really have a chance again from that time. My school didn't have a drama program when I was there. It wasn't until I went to college, actually in my final semester, I got into a play, and it rekindled this that was lying dormant in me. And then I auditioned for a Shakespeare company, which has become over time the Cal Shakes. I was in the first two productions of it, and then I studied theater at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art, and kind of went from there. So
Interesting. So
yeah.
now the German department at UC Berkeley has a cabaret group. Too bad they weren't going when you were there. You could have done a little bit of both.
Yeah, that's true. Although it's interesting, the very first play, the only one I ever did when I was at Cal, was by Büchner, Leonce and Lena. So it had a German thing going, but
there we go. So I have one of my students has asked, how many people have you reached through this project?
Well, this current Zoom project, I've reached. How many people are in the audience today?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 people in the Zoom project, because I just did one in Marin County for over 700 students, and I've done several hundred. Anyway, it's hard to know because Zoom unfortunately doesn't give us statistics like that.
I just heard from the admin here, over 170 people were here today.
Ah, good to know.
So we'll add that.
All right.
So then there was one other thing. Let's see. Do you have any other characters or acts that you had originally in the project, but you cut out for the final version?
Yeah, there were other characters. Yes, there's a lot of scenes and characters. Not so many in the characters, but there were other scenes with these characters that ended up, in the pile that didn't make the final cut. As was the case with the full-length play "I Died in Auschwitz." There were all kinds of characters and situations, but I mean, the final product is about an hour and 20 minutes, so it's like 6 times the length of the short play that you just saw. So yes, there's always things that don't make the cut.
Right.
And there were a few characters and definitely a bunch of scenes that didn't make the cut.
So one final comment from one of my students that I am thrilled to read to you, because it is in German. Vielen Dank für die Teilung dieser Geschichten. So vielen Dank für die Teilung dieser Geschichten.
Oh yes, danke vielmals.
So So Roger, we come to the end of our questions and probably the end of our time. We thank you again very much for your willingness to come to our school and present this to our students. I think it's incredibly important for us to learn from history, maybe even more so now than ever before, but I guess I can't really say that. It's always true. And I think your efforts are extraordinarily beneficial to all of us, and we really appreciate it. So
well, thank you, Nancy, and
Dunk. Carry on with the great work that you're doing. It was very nice
well,
to meet you. And we'll
thank
see
you. I just wanted to say I really appreciate all these great questions, and thank you to all the students and faculty who are there, for your attention. It's been great for me, and I look forward, maybe down the road we'll be able to do something again. Anyway,
Okay,
thank you, and thank you.